Fact is, Alberta taxpayers can no longer be asked to continue to subsidize the entire country through equalization and federal transfers, permit the federal government to flood our borders with new arrivals, and then give free access to our most generous in the country's social programs to anyone who moves here. This is not only grossly unfair to Alberta taxpayers, but also financially crippling and undercuts the quality of our healthcare, education, and other social services. The October 19th referendum will therefore include the following questions. Number 1. Do you support the government of Alberta taking increased control over immigration for the purpose of decreasing immigration to more sustainable levels, prioritizing economic migration, and ensuring Albertans have first priority to new employment opportunities? Number 2, do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law mandating only Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and individuals with an Alberta-approved immigration status will be eligible for provincially funded programs, such as health, education, and other social services? Number 3, assuming that all citizens and permanent residents continue to qualify for social support programs as they do now, do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law requiring all individuals with a non-permanent legal immigration status to be resident in Alberta for at least 12 months before qualifying for any provincially funded social support programs? Number 4, assuming that all citizens and permanent residents continue to qualify for public health care and education as they do now, do you support the government of Alberta charging a reasonable fee or premium to individuals with a non-permanent immigration status living in Alberta for their and their families' use of the healthcare and education systems? Number 5, do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law requiring individuals to provide proof of citizenship, such as a passport, birth certificate, or citizenship card, to be eligible to vote in a provincial election? To strengthen Alberta's constitutional and fiscal position within a united Canada, we will also be asking you the following questions on the referendum ballot. Do you support the government of Alberta proactively working with other willing provinces to amend the Canadian Constitution in the following ways? A, have provincial governments and not the federal government select the justices appointed to provincial King's Bench and appeals courts. B, abolish the unelected federal Senate. C, allow provinces to opt out of federal programs intruding on provincial jurisdictions such as health, education, and social services without losing any of the associated federal funding for use in their own provincial social programs. D, better protect provincial rights from federal interference by giving a province's laws dealing with provincial or shared constitutional areas of jurisdiction priority over federal laws when in conflict with one another.
Last month, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith raised the stakes in the efforts by some to force a referendum on separating from Canada. The debate raises fundamental questions about unity, leverage, and whether referendums serve as democratic expression or strategic bargaining tools.
And Eddie, I want to tell you, I reached out to the group behind the push for separation with an invitation to appear tonight. It was declined. I also reached out to the group known as Forever Canadian, and Thomas, who has appeared on our program in the past, he accepted the invitation, and I've been waiting for him to pop in, and I'll just keep an eye out. Something must have come up to delay him, or he may be having some technical difficulties. Anyway, if he pops in, we will get him on. But as I say, the group that is pushing for a separate Alberta now trying to gather about 177,000 signatures by May 2nd, declined. And the reason was, according to them, under Alberta election rules, they are not allowed to go out and educate the public on the referendum. My response to that was the fact that I didn't ask you to educate anyone. I just wanted to get your reaction to this last-minute play by Premier Smith with her 9-point referendum for October 19th. That's this fall. And also how their campaign is going. They seem to be buoyed by the fact that they're getting a lot of turnout when they have signature sessions around the province, and I guess they've even hit some of the few snowbirds that still go south to the U.S. as well. So, however, in the polling is telling a different story, and we'll get into that in a moment. A lot of political pundits have said that this whole referendum issue that Premier Smith brought out, she brought it out about 4 or 5 days before the provincial budget was tabled. And that provincial budget had a $9 billion deficit. And the suggestion was, well, this was to kind of flood the field and take some of the attention away and the heat off the budget and the deficit. And you notice leading up to this outline that we just had on, she had indicated that immigration and the immigration policy of the federal government, especially in the last 10 years, which would be the Trudeau era, a lot of the immigrants arrived in Alberta and they set up residence in Alberta, and it's put a real pressure point on providing services, education, and healthcare, for example. And that leads to some of the questions that she's outlined as far as controlling when somebody comes into the province and they're a temporary resident, putting some guardrails up around it. The other part of it, especially at the end where she's talking about an elected Senate, and I totally agree, abolishing the Senate, and I totally agree with her. And, the appointment of provincial judges. It seems to me that why would you have Ottawa appointing judges when the provinces are quite capable of appointing their own provincial judges? And so on it goes. And again, kind of a preemptive strike to take a bit of the air out of the balloon of the separatists in Alberta. So that's kind of an overview. And I don't know. What I'm seeing, and I did a quick check on polling today, and as I said, the separatist group has been buoyed by the number of people turning out. They're getting large numbers of people turning out to sign. But when you look at the actual polling, there are some people who are looking at it as, yeah, I'll support separation if it sends a message to Ottawa and they're ready to sit down as a result and renegotiate a lot of things as far as Alberta's position in the Federation. They don't really want to separate. They just want to use this as ammunition for a discussion. Because, yeah, exactly. So that's where that sits right now as far as everything is concerned. But it brings us to a couple of things. You hit the nail right on the head, Eddie. Is this referendum binding or political leverage? No, it's not binding. Not by any stretch of the imagination. If they were successful, in same with Quebec, any referendum here is not binding. Correct. There's a whole process that you have to go through, and it gets involved. It's spelled out in the Constitution, of which Quebec is not a signatory still, but it is spelled out in the Constitution as to what can happen and what cannot happen. The other thing is, this whole move and talk about separation in Alberta in particular, a little bit in Saskatchewan, we've had a group on from Saskatchewan on the program. Are citizens using blunt tools because institutional trust is low?
Yeah.
In my opinion, yes. They're going for the big bat because they feel that they have not been listened to. Their provincial politicians have not been listened to by Ottawa, and that they're getting a raw deal.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, when we had both Thomas and the representative from Saskatchewan on board, they both actually said that the feeling of the population is that they have not been listened to by Ottawa. And they want to ensure that their voices are heard, not just through federal elections, where by the time, as they mentioned, you get to Ontario, the election is pretty much over, which gives everybody else the feeling that nobody really cares what's going on out west. Both representatives from Alberta and Saskatchewan on our show clearly said one pro separation, one anti-separation. They both clearly said our constituents feel like they haven't been heard. How does the government and how does the province address that? So it's the same situation in Quebec. You know, we're talking about 70s and 80s politics here, Gary, which is carried into today. Back in those days, Quebec was not heard. And you know what? Maybe some of our other provinces are feeling the neglect. I know, especially over the last, let's call it 15 years. You know, to be honest, over the last 15 years, that provinces, for one reason or another, were just not listened to by Ottawa. Can that change? Both representatives on our show said, absolutely. But Ottawa's got to lead the way on how that change is going to happen, right? And, you know, Prime Minister Carney's got his plate full with a whole lot of other things, basically keeping our country intact as a result of all this crap from our neighbors down south. He still has to address this issue about binding and tying our country together and getting closer relationship with the provincial administrations and recognizing the concerns of the citizens of these provinces. He can't put that by the wayside. He's got to attack that as well. You just can't ignore it.
No, and this time last year, and we, Prime Minister Carney had won the Liberal leadership, or was it early March? I think it was early March, around this time. Mm-hmm. He, went on to win the Liberal leadership, and then become Prime Minister. And there was, because of the trade war at its peak, there was a lot of unity. If you recall, when he would hold the Council of the Federation, of course, at that point, Doug Ford was the chair of the Council of Federation, and he was like Captain Canada in his own right. And so there seemed to be a lot of unity right around the table with the premiers of the provinces and the territories, and a lot of very open discussion, and they all felt very good about the discussions they were having with the Prime Minister Carney at the time. Mm-hmm. And some things started moving forward, like a lot of the trade barriers came down, for example. But over the last few months, it seems that has sort of eased to a degree. And so, the heat's come down a bit. And some of the old frustrations are starting to really rise to the surface again. And of course, one of the first things, in Alberta, for example, it has been fueled by some of the comments from the Oval Office over mm-hmm. the last 12 to 15 months, or even more, as far as, the 51st state and be much better off and all of this kind of thing. And they've started to, that really seemed to propel them and give them some momentum to get out and start this whole situation. But again, the last poll I looked at, yes, the support was growing for separation, but then when you broke it down, about not quite half, about 47% said yes, they support the referendum on separation, but only to be used for leverage. 33% were hardcore separatists. So,
Well, that comes down to the question and the story. When you're looking at separatist movements, they are always trying to justify why a province would be better off alone than part of Canadian Confederation. What they'll do is they'll say why we shouldn't be part of Canadian Federation, but they don't necessarily communicate it. And I've seen it here, being a Montreal-born Quebecer. I have never seen the separatist movement speak about risk, Gary.
mhm.
Oh, you know what? We'll figure it out as we get there. They never communicate the potential risk to the citizens, and to me, that's clear misrepresentation. Inform the citizens of what the benefits are going to be, what the risks are if we do separate, and allow the citizen to make that kind of a decision, as opposed to, break out your pom-poms, everything's going to be just fine because we're going to be independent and we're going to have our own flag and we're going to have our own national anthem. Gary, we know that it goes way, way, way beyond that. We know that in Spain there's a drive for the Catalan region to separate. What kind of communication actually gets conveyed to constituents out there on the risks of separating from a confederation? I know it doesn't happen in Canada the way I would like it to, and I'm just wondering if it's the same thing out in Europe, Christian.
Well, we're all sitting together in the European Union, and all the countries in Europe, they living from a big pot. There are sometimes little movements of separation. We had it, like, I think in the 90s, or even in Switzerland. I mean, it was a different referendum, but part of Switzerland wanted to go back into European Union, which, thanks God, was not taking place. But you hear it less, like we have maybe the same problems like here in Canada, but they are dealt differently because we're living under a big umbrella of the European Union. There's big money to be distributed to all the countries, and the countries who are is benefiting more than contributing to it, usually don't complain that much. Let's put it like this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Not really.
Okay. Well, Gary, let me ask you a question, and I think we kind of briefly discussed this in one of our international chats, side chats. So here we have Danielle Smith with a slew of referendum questions. Okay. The most obvious one when it comes to a referendum question, it has to be very clear. Do you want to separate from Canada? Yes or no? So the regular person, individual, would clearly understand that question. What does yes mean and what does no mean for myself as a citizen of Alberta? Do you really think that somebody's going to sit behind a polling station or a voting booth and read through every one of these questions before they get to the main one? Do you want to separate from Alberta or not? Now, I know we kind of joked around about this, and what are your thoughts on the length of these questions? And are these questions all going to be on the same ticket, on the same ballot, and expect to get a coherent answer on every one of these so Alberta can take a step forward in response to these referendum questions? Because that's a lot of talk, that's a lot of ink on a lot of paper. How do you think this is going to work out?
Well, I think definitely that all of those questions will be on the one ballot. October 19th is the day for the referendum, so they're going to be on the ballot. And I mean, we're no strangers now to lengthy ballots in elections. Just look at the last federal election in that, what was it, 7-foot-long ballot in Pierre Poilievre's old riding.
Yeah, and that was a protest ballot, though.
Yeah, but still, the mold has been broken, the precedent has been set.
True.
The problem I have with, the questioning is in plain wording, but you're right. A lot of people going in, unless they have studied these questions for a couple of days and given them thought before going in and marking their response on the ballot, they're going to walk in and all they're just going to see is just words.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, they're in a hurry. They just want to get this done and get out, because they've probably already stood in line and had to go through all of the verification process. And, it takes up time. So there's a lot stuffed in there, and maybe it's by design to maybe she's looking for a certain outcome, and if you stuff each question with a lot of words, you're kind of pushing it in a certain direction. However, the Clarity Act states that the question must be clear and simple. One question, easily understood, clear and simple. Some of those questions, it's like the second and third question are kind of rolled in disguise to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And, when you're looking at a yes or a no answer, it can be interpreted a number of different ways. So, and when she talked about this, she also said that she believes Alberta belongs in a unified Canada. But we want to negotiate a better deal overall. And parts of these, part of the deal will include some segments, such as, the transfer or equalization payments, the appointing provincial judges, taking, and in this one I have an issue with, taking the federal money for various programs, education and healthcare, but all Ottawa does is just cut the check and send it to the province, and the province does whatever it wants to do within those areas with that money, which is essentially what they're doing now. And going straight across this country, healthcare is in a mess. And there's really not a whole lot of accountability except at election time for each provincial government as to how they're spending that money. And all I ever see is new levels of bureaucracy popping up around healthcare. Totally against it. And somewhere along the way, you know what? Yeah, I understand the provinces wanting more control over their fate. That's great. But when you get into certain areas, and one of them is healthcare in particular, you haven't done a great job. You screwed up, basically. And you have no one to blame but yourselves. And in this case, I think the federal government should step in for the benefit of every person living and paying taxes in this country. All right, so let's wrap it up. And again, why it matters, what we've been talking about. Well, referendums can empower voters. You do feel empowered. You do feel that you're marking your X for a reason. However, frequent high-stake votes may normalize instability and if the trust between governments is strained. And Quebec is a great example of that, Eddie.
Yeah.
With the referendums in this province and the economic hit that it took, and yet we're coming around again.
Yeah.
It just doesn't end.